The transmission lasted 11 seconds. No dramatic music. No fleet of warships lined up behind the sender. No threats dressed in formal language. Just a human woman sitting at a plain desk, holding a coffee mug in one hand and reading from a laminated card in the other. You are approaching sovereign Earth-designated space. Retreat is advised. This advisory will not be repeated. Commander Nora Dale set the card down, took a sip from her mug, and cut the feed. That was it. In the Great Hall of the Keth Imperial High Admiralty, 300 light-years from Earth, the transmission played again on the main screen. Admiral Vale Chorus watched it a second time with his hands folded behind his back. Then he turned to face his officers. The room erupted in laughter. Not polite laughter, not the restrained kind that officers use when they want to seem dignified. Genuine, full-bodied laughter that bounced off the high walls and the tall columns of dark stone. Chorus himself allowed a slow smile to cross his face. He was a man of 60 years of command, a man who had overseen the absorption of 4 lesser civilizations into the Keth Empire without losing a single ship. He had seen species beg. He had seen species threaten. He had never, in all those years, seen a species threaten him with a laminated card and a coffee mug. He turned to his tactical officer. Species classification. Pre-Tier 3, Admiral. No recorded interstellar military engagements. 17 failed diplomatic expansion attempts in the last century. Currently occupied with internal construction projects across their home system. Weapons capability. Minimal. Several short-range defense platforms around their home world. Nothing that would register as a credible deterrent against a fleet of our size. Chorus nodded slowly. He walked to the edge of the command platform and looked out at the star map projected across the far wall. A glowing line marked the boundary of what the humans called their sovereign space. A thin line, a meaningless line. File the advisory as received, he said. Proceed on course. The laughter had not fully died down when a younger officer near the back of the room stopped smiling. His name was Pren. He was 23 years old, assigned to the fleet as a junior tactical analyst, the youngest officer on the flagship by nearly a decade. He held a communication pad in both hands and stared at the frozen frame of the human commander on the screen. He read the advisory again. Not the tone of it, not the delivery, the actual words. Retreat is advised. Not retreat or face consequences. Not retreat before we respond. Not retreat because we are watching. Just retreat is advised. And then, this advisory will not be repeated. Not cannot be repeated, not we choose not to repeat it, will not. He had studied 17 languages as part of his tactical certification. He understood the difference between a declaration and a statement of fact. The human woman had not threatened them. She had informed them. The way you inform someone that the road ahead is washed out, not a warning, a description of what was true. Pren looked at his pad, then at the star map, then at the back of Admiral Chorus's head. He said nothing. He was 23 years old and Chorus had 40 years of command. He wrote it in his personal log instead. The grammar is wrong for a threat. This does not read like posturing. This reads like a maintenance notice. Then he closed his log and watched the fleet cross the boundary line. Nothing happened. The stars did not change. The instruments did not report any shift in the surrounding space. No alarms. No incoming fire, no response of any kind from anywhere in the sector ahead of them. Chorus noted it in his command log as confirmation that the advisory had been an empty gesture by a species that had not yet learned what gestures cost. Pren noted the silence differently. He had grown up near the ocean on his home world. He knew the particular quality of air in the minutes before a large storm arrives, the way everything goes very still. The way the birds disappear first. He sat at his station and watched the instruments return clean reading after clean reading, and he thought about the birds. The fleet moved deeper into the sector, and nothing continued to happen for 2 full days. which was exactly long enough for everyone aboard the flagship to stop thinking about it. Chorus resumed his normal schedule. Briefings in the morning, tactical reviews in the afternoon, private correspondence in the evening. The fleet moved in standard formation, 17 warships and 4 support vessels, cutting through a region of space that had been catalogued as unremarkable by the 3 survey missions that had passed through it in the past century. Empty, quiet, a stretch of nothing between somewhere and somewhere else. Pren ran his own scans on the second morning. He was not assigned to do this. His duties that day involved reviewing supply manifests and updating the ship's cartographic records. Routine work. The kind of work that exists to fill the hours between actual events. He did his assigned work first, and then, in the hour before his rest period, he opened a secondary scan channel and pointed it at the background radiation of the sector they were passing through. He found the signal on his third pass. It was not a signal in the conventional sense. It was a pattern embedded in the gravitational background noise of the region, the way a watermark is embedded in paper. You could look directly at it and see nothing unless you knew exactly what to look for and how to filter the noise away from it. Pren almost missed it. He very nearly closed the channel and went to rest. But the pattern repeated, and then it repeated again, and the interval between repetitions was not random. It was precise to a degree that natural phenomena do not achieve. He triangulated the origin point and felt the air leave his lungs. The signal was old, not old in the way of ancient ruins or forgotten transmissions, old in the way of deep infrastructure, the kind of thing built over decades by people who intended it to last. His instruments could not date it exactly, but the degradation profile of the signal carrier suggested it had been active for at minimum 60 years. 60 years ago, the humans had barely reached their own moon. They had not had ships capable of placing anything in this sector 60 years ago, which meant something else had placed it. Or the humans had been doing things in this sector 60 years ago that their official history did not reflect. Pren brought his findings to his division supervisor, a senior officer named Garl who had 20 years of service and the particular tiredness of a man who had spent all 20 of them being right and being ignored in equal measure. Garl looked at the scan data. He looked at it for a long time. "Stop looking for problems," he said finally, and handed the pad back. Pren returned to his station. He pulled up everything in the fleet's database on human history, human science, human engineering. Most of it was thin. The Keth Empire had not considered humanity worth extensive study. There were survey reports, population assessments, a handful of translated cultural documents, and a brief technical summary of their known technology base that described them as developing but not yet capable of posing any strategic concern. The summary was 14 years old. He read through it anyway, looking for anything that touched on spatial mechanics, gravitational engineering, or theoretical physics. He found one reference, a single line in a cultural document, translated from a human academic publication. The title of a research project that had apparently been funded by their planetary government 62 years ago. The translation was rough, but the meaning was clear enough. Project: Long-Range Passive Deterrence Through Spatial Mechanics. Phase 1: Theoretical Modeling. The database entry ended there. No follow-up, no completion record, no mention of any subsequent phases. Pren sat very still for several minutes. Then he opened a secure channel to Keth High Command and began composing a message. He described what he had found. He described the signal. He described the 14-year-old intelligence summary and the gap it represented. He described the research project name and what it implied about the direction of human scientific development over the preceding 6 decades. He sent the message. He never received a reply. Not because the channel failed, not because the message was intercepted. He checked the delivery logs twice. The message had been received at the High Command Communication Hub. Someone had read it. No one answered. On the other side of the boundary, they had crossed 2 days ago. In a small monitoring station orbiting at the edge of Earth-designated space, Nora Dale sat at her desk reviewing an incident report. Someone across the room called out to ask if she planned to escalate the incursion. She did not look up from what she was reading. "Already done," she said. The officer across the room waited a moment, then asked who she had reported it to. Nora set down her mug. "The relevant people," she said. She went back to reading. On the fleet's long-range sensors, something appeared at the far edge of the sector. It was not a ship. It was not a debris field. It was not a star or a planet or any natural formation in the standard registry. The sensor reading refreshed every 30 seconds, and each time it refreshed, the object read slightly differently, not because the object was changing. Because the sensor was having trouble deciding what the object was, which was a thing that did not happen to military-grade equipment under normal circumstances. Chorus looked at the reading for a long time. His academic instincts, the same instincts that had made him an exceptional commander, stirred at the base of his thoughts. He ordered a course correction toward it. Pren received his emergency leave request back from the processing queue. Denied. He filed it again and sat down to wait, watching the sensor reading refresh and refresh and refresh. The object was a station. Not armed, not crewed, at least not in any way the fleet's sensors could detect. It had no weapon arrays, no shield emitters, no communication towers broadcasting anything other than that quiet repeating pattern embedded in the background noise of the sector. It sat in open space like a very large, very old piece of industrial machinery that someone had switched on and walked away from. The architecture was utilitarian. Plain panels of dark material bolted together in functional shapes with no consideration for appearance. The kind of thing you build when you are solving a problem, and you do not care whether anyone admires the solution. It was, by the standards of any spacefaring civilization, completely unimpressive. Chorus ordered a boarding team. Pren was not on the boarding team. He watched the feed from their helmet cameras at his station, sitting very straight, not touching his coffee. The interior of the station matched the exterior, corridors of bare metal, lighting that was functional and nothing more, rooms filled with equipment that the boarding team's field analysts struggled to categorize. Not weapons, not communications arrays, not propulsion systems or power generators or anything that mapped cleanly to a known function. And then the documentation room. One of the boarding team members pushed open a door that had not been locked and found an entire room stacked with physical records, printed documents, bound in plain covers, filed in rows of cabinets that went from floor to ceiling. The field analyst pulled one binder from the shelf and opened it. Pren watched him flip through the pages on the helmet camera feed and felt something cold settle in his chest. Engineering reports, dated, signed, stamped with review codes. He had his translation certification active, and the feed resolution was high enough to read the text on the pages. He began translating without being asked. Year 1, theoretical modeling complete. Primary deterrence mechanism validated in simulation. Recommend proceeding to Phase 2. Signed, Chief Engineer Owen Hale. Year 3, Phase 2 complete. Passive signal anchor installed at sector coordinates. Signal decay rate within acceptable parameters. Proceeding to Phase 3. Signed, Owen Hale. Year 7, Phase 3 integration successful. Trigger threshold calibrated. First full system test conducted in uninhabited sector. Result, nominal. No observable effect on surrounding space until threshold crossed. Signed, Owen Hale. The signature on Year 7 was shakier than Year 1. The same hand, older. Pren kept reading. Year 11, Phase 4. Year 16, Phase 5. Year 23, Phase 6. Each phase signed by Owen Hale, each signature a little less neat, a little more tired, written by a man who had spent decades building something that he would probably never see used, and had decided that did not matter. Year 39, Phase 7, operational, threshold calibrated for target mass and drive signature profile, Full system integration verified. Passive signal anchor confirmed active. Advisory language drafted and submitted to border authority for use in standard deterrence notification. Signed Owen Hale. And then beneath it, in a different hand, a single line added later. Chief Engineer Owen Hale, retired. Project certification transferred to standing maintenance team. The date on Phase 7 completion was 3 years ago. Pren understood now. The station was not a weapon. It did not fire anything. It did not destroy anything. It was a key, and the key had been in the lock since the moment the fleet crossed the boundary marker, and the mechanism it controlled had been loading quietly in the background for 2 full days, reading their mass signature, reading their drive profile, confirming over and over that the thing crossing into this space was exactly the kind of thing that was not supposed to be here. He opened the secure channel to High Command again. His hands were steady. He was proud of how steady his hands were. He began typing faster than he had ever typed in his life. The fold began before he finished the message. It did not look like anything. He had expected something visible, light bending or a tremor in the sensor readings or some kind of alarm. There was none of that. The instrument simply began returning coordinates that did not match the star charts. The star charts were not wrong. The readings were not corrupted. The stars themselves had changed. Or rather, the ship had moved to a place where those stars did not exist. Chorus's voice on the command channel was measured, controlled. The voice of a man who has faced crises before and who knows that panic is a luxury he cannot afford. Navigation report. The navigation officer's response came back after a pause that was 2 seconds longer than it should have been. Admiral, I am reading coordinates that do not correspond to any charted region of space. The charts are functioning correctly. The instruments are functioning correctly. Then where are we? Another pause. I do not know, Admiral. I do not have a reference point. There is no reference point. The stars in this region do not appear in any catalog. Pren's incomplete message sat in the outbox of his communication terminal, unsent, because the communication array was functioning perfectly and had nowhere to send anything to. The place they had gone did not have a name. Nothing had ever been there before them. Nothing had ever needed a name for it before now. In the documentation room, among the neat rows of signed and stamped engineering reports, the boarding team stood very still and said nothing. The boarding team's field analyst was still holding the binder he had pulled from the shelf. He was on the page that covered Phase 7. He had not moved since the fold completed. He turned to the camera. He looked directly into it, directly at the feed that Pren was watching from the flagship, and he said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the situation had not already said more efficiently. Pren closed the feed. He sat at his station in a region of space with no name, in a fleet that was no longer in any location that existed in any catalog, and he thought about the grammar of the advisory. Retreat is advised. This advisory will not be repeated. Not cannot, not will not be given again. Will not be repeated because it would make no difference, because by the time you needed to hear it twice, you were already here. Pren was not on the fleet. He had submitted his emergency leave request twice. The second time it came back denied. He had done what anyone his age does when they run out of official options. He had called his mother's cousin's husband, who worked in a low-level administrative capacity at Keth High Command, and who owed the family a favor dating back 8 years, to an incident involving a permit for a construction project that no one talked about anymore. 20 minutes after his second denied request, a quiet approval appeared in the system from a mid-level authorization office. No explanation, no record of who had initiated it. He was on a courier vessel, 1 sector, outside the boundary when the fleet disappeared. He knew because his long-range scanner stopped returning data from that region. Not a signal interruption, not instrument failure. The data stopped because there was no longer anything in that region of space to return data about. 17 warships, 4 support vessels. Gone. He sat in the courier vessel's small observation room, and watched the blank space on his scanner where the fleet used to be. He did not cry. He was not sure what the right emotion was for what had just happened. He had known those people. He had eaten meals with them and argued tactical theory with them and spent 2 years of his life in close quarters with them. And they were not dead as far as he understood it. They were simply somewhere that was not here, somewhere that had no exit. Somewhere that a human engineer named Owen Hale had spent 39 years building at a perfectly ordinary desk, signing his name on perfectly ordinary reports, going home at the end of each workday to a perfectly ordinary life, and believing, without apparent doubt, that what he was building would work. Prin thought about that for a long time. He thought about what it meant to build something for 39 years that you would never see used, what kind of patience that required. What kind of certainty? Not arrogance. Arrogance is loud. This had been quiet. This had been the quiet of a species that had looked at the mathematics, confirmed the mathematics, and then spent 4 decades making the mathematics real without telling anyone, without threatening anyone, without making any noise at all. The first inquiry transmission arrived at Keth High Command within 6 hours. Then 3 more. Then 7. Then a flood of them from species across the known galaxy who had noticed, through their own long-range instruments, that a Keth fleet had entered a disputed sector and had not come out the other side. By the end of the first day, the inquiry queue at the Imperial Communications Center was the longest it had been in 30 years of records. Nora Dale answered each one personally. She did not rush. She did not send form responses. Each transmission received a reply that had her face in it, her desk in the background, the same mug somewhere in the frame. She read from what appeared to be a different laminated card than the one she had used for the original advisory. The Keth Imperial fleet crossed into sovereign Earth-designated space following a formal advisory. The advisory was not repeated. Thank you for your inquiry. No elaboration, no threat. No expression of regret and no expression of satisfaction either. She said it the way you report a weather event, a thing that occurred, a thing that is now in the record. The inquiries stopped within 48 hours. Pren wrote his account over the following week. He did it by hand in long form because he wanted the effort of it to match the weight of what he was describing. He was not a writer. The sentences did not come out elegant, but they were accurate, and accuracy was what the moment required. He did not write about the fleet. The fleet's fate was in the instrument records, and those records were already being processed by people whose job it was to process them. He wrote about the warning instead. Specifically, about the word advised. He had certified in 17 languages, and he understood that word choice in formal communication is never accidental. Threatened would have told them that humanity was frightened and trying to project strength. Warned would have told them that humanity considered the situation serious. Ordered would have told them that humanity considered itself their equal or superior and was asserting that position. Advised told them something different. Advised was what you say to someone when you already know what is going to happen, and you are offering them the result of a calculation they have not yet run. It is the language of the doctor who tells you what will happen if you do not take the medication. It is not a threat. It is a courtesy extended to someone who still has the option of making a better choice. The advisory had been a courtesy. They had declined the courtesy. He submitted the account to the Keth Imperial Archives. It was classified immediately, and he expected to never hear about it again. He was wrong about that. 3 months later, a senior archivist contacted him and told him that his account had been read by 11 members of the High Council, and that there was a formal request for him to expand on it, specifically the section on the language of the advisory. He spent another week on the expanded version. He was honest in it. He wrote that the fault was not in the humans' deterrence system or in the physics of what they had built. The fault was in the assumption that a species with limited military capability and no recorded interstellar engagements was therefore limited in all relevant ways. The assumption that military posture was the only measure of danger. The assumption that a species building infrastructure rather than weapons was a species not worth taking seriously. Owen Hale had never built a weapon. 39 years of his life and not a single weapon. Only a door. A very specific door with a very specific lock that only opened in one direction. The expanded account was also classified. Pren requested a transfer to the diplomatic corps. His stated reason on the official form was career development. In his personal log that night, he wrote one line: "I want to learn what other laminated cards they have." The new ship appeared at the boundary 6 months later. It was not Keth. The Keth Empire had not sent another ship to that sector and was not planning to. The ship that appeared was from a civilization called the Varath Collective, a species that had achieved interstellar travel 80 years ago and had spent most of those 80 years making themselves into what they considered an impressive military power. They had heard about the Keth fleet. Everyone had heard about the Keth fleet by now. The story had moved through the galaxy the way that any story involving the disappearance of 21 vessels moves, fast and in pieces, and in the mouths of the bold and the afraid in equal measure. The bold ones told it as a challenge. The afraid ones told it as a warning. The Varath commander, a man named Dax who had 16 years of command and a wall of commendations behind his desk, told it to himself as an unsolved puzzle, and he had always found unsolved puzzles intolerable. He opened a channel to the Earth Border Authority monitoring station. The officer who answered was young, new to the posting. His name was Callum Ward, and he was 26 years old, and he had taken this assignment because the pay was good, and the previous holder of the post had retired to a comfortable planet with a good climate, and Callum had understood the job to be quiet and uneventful. He had been in the posting for 4 months when the Varath ship appeared at the boundary. He picked up the laminated card from his desk. He did not look nervous. He had practiced this. He had practiced it in his bathroom mirror every morning for 4 months because Commander Dale had told him when she handed over the posting that the card was the job. Everything else was paperwork. "You are approaching sovereign Earth-designated space," he said. "Retreat is advised. This advisory will not be repeated." The Varath commander studied him through the feed. "That is the same language," Dax said. "That was used with the Keth Imperial fleet." "Yes," Callum said. "The Keth fleet did not retreat." "No." A pause. "You are not going to tell us what happened to them." Callum held the card. He looked at the Varath commander with the particular expression of someone who has been asked to explain something that is already fully explained. "The advisory covers it," he said. The silence on the channel lasted 11 seconds. Callum counted them. He did not know why he counted them. Something about the number felt right. Commander Dax cut the feed. The Varath ship began its retreat. Callum filed his incident report. 1 paragraph. Outcome: advisory acknowledged, border integrity maintained. He set it on the stack with the others, put the laminated card in its drawer, and made himself a coffee. In a research archive on the third moon of an academic world, a historian named Petra Lane was working on the first authorized biography of Owen Hale. She had been given access to his project files, his engineering reports, and his personal correspondence. She had spent 2 months reading through 40 years of his life. He had never been famous. He had never given a public speech or attended a diplomatic function or appeared in any record that was not purely administrative. He had spent his career in a small office, supervising a small team, building a thing that almost no one knew existed. His personal correspondence was mostly letters to his daughter about ordinary things, what the weather was like, how a garden he kept on the station roof was coming along, a recipe for a type of bread he had learned from a colleague. On the day he signed the Phase 7 completion report, he had written her a letter that said the project was finished and that he was looking forward to retirement and that the tomatoes this year had been the best yet. There was no letter about what the project had done or what it might do, no letter about the calculations or the physics or the mechanism, only the tomatoes. Petra read that letter 3 times. She thought about what it meant to be the kind of person who builds something like that and comes home and talks about tomatoes, the absolute steadiness of it, the certainty that does not need to announce itself, the patience that does not need to perform. She wrote in her notes, "He did not build it because he was angry. He did not build it because he was afraid. He built it because someone had to, and he was the person who knew how." In a corridor of the Keth Imperial Diplomatic Corps, Pren was walking fast between two meetings when a senior colleague stopped him and asked whether he had heard about the Vareth incident at the Earth boundary. He said he had. The colleague shook his head slowly. "They actually retreated," he said. "One transmission and they turned around." He seemed genuinely surprised. Pren was not surprised. He thought about Callum Ward, 26 years old, holding a laminated card, saying 11 words, and holding a boundary that stretched across a sector of space with one hand, while Owen Hale's 39 years of work held it with the other. He thought about what it actually meant to be dangerous. Not loud, not large, not the species with the most ships or the biggest weapons or the longest list of victories in recorded conflicts. Not the species that threatened loudest or postured hardest or put the most warships on the screen when it sent a message. The dangerous species was the one that had done the math 60 years before the conversation started. The one that had already finished the calculation and was offering you the result as a courtesy. The one that said retreat is advised in the same tone you use when you are reading a maintenance notice, because to them, it was a maintenance notice, a description of what was already true. Pren walked to his next meeting. In the monitoring station at the edge of Earth-designated space, Callum Ward sat at his desk and watched the stars through the viewport and drank his coffee. The sector beyond the boundary was quiet. It was always quiet. That was the point. Somewhere in a region of space with no name, in coordinates that appeared in no catalog, the Keth Imperial fleet drifted in perfect mechanical condition, engines functioning, instruments reading cleanly, life support cycling normally. Every system working exactly as it was built to work. The last entry in Admiral Chorus's command log, recovered from a signal fragment that briefly crossed back into known space before vanishing, was 7 words. "We should have asked what advised meant." Callum finished his coffee, washed the mug, set it on his desk for morning and went to rest. The laminated card sat in its drawer. "Ready?"